Hello, YouTube friends. Welcome, everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Pennsylvania Whispers. Chapter 1. The Hemlock Hollow Cabin. Leaves crunched under Clara's feet as she descended the old trail to Hemlock Hollow. Autumn had tinged the Pennsylvania woods with shades of blood and gold, and the air carried an earthy, damp smell, as if something ancient was breathing among the roots. She was 27 years old, fresh from Philadelphia, escaping a life that had become too noisy, too broken. Her mother had just died, and among the belongings she had left behind, she found a rusty key and a letter with a handwritten address. Hemlock Hollow, don't go alone. But she went alone. The address corresponded to an old cabin her mother had inherited from her grandfather, a man she never spoke of. On the letter, written in quivering ink, was a clear warning. If you ever decide to look for answers, just go with someone else. Things there haven't quite slept. Clara had thought it was a metaphor. Now she wasn't so sure. The cabin was nestled deep in the forest, so far from paved roads that not even the GPS could locate it. He had to leave his car on a dirt road and walk for almost an hour with his backpack on his shoulder. When he arrived, he saw it. A wooden structure blackened by years with a leaning chimney and windows that looked like blind eyes. Clara pushed the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the dust was so thick it looked like fog, and the antique furniture creaked just by looking at it. Everything was intact, as if someone had left minutes ago. Above the fireplace hung a portrait. A wiry man with a thin mustache and eyes too vivid for a faded oil painting. The name was carved at the base of the frame. Elias Wexler. You are my great-grandfather, Clara whispered, feeling a shiver run down her back. He lit some candles. There was no electricity, and apparently no running water. The fireplace was still working, so she took it upon herself to light it. The crackling of the fire soothed her for a few minutes. Outside, the wind played through the trees as if whispering words in a language she didn't understand. There was no phone signal, no neighbors, no electricity for miles around. That's when Clara found the diary. It was in the second drawer of a dusty chest of drawers under some linen shirts. The first pages were blank, but later someone had written in sepia ink, November 3rd, 1911. Today I saw the figure again. It does not enter. It just watches. The trees make way for him. Clara read those words quietly, as if that might mitigate the discomfort she felt. There was something about the handwriting, tight, nervous, as if whoever was writing feared that something was watching them as they did so. He turned pages. The entries were erratic, spaced out. They all spoke of the same figure, a silhouette that appeared at the edge of the forest, always at dusk, motionless, with a broad hat and no visible face. Sometimes the author spoke of voices coming from the dry well behind the cabin, voices that repeated his name in voices that were not human. At one point, the paper simply stated, I'm not crazy. I saw him again. He has my face. Clara slammed the diary shut. The cabin creaked as if something was moving within its walls. Outside, it was already getting dark. She lit another candle and decided to investigate the grounds. With a flashlight, she went out the back door. The trees were still. The forest seemed to hold its breath. He walked to the well. It was covered by a wooden lid, barely held in place by rusty nails. Around it, the vegetation was denser, as if something invisible prevented it from growing beyond a certain point. Clara crouched down, illuminated the crevice between the boards. A winter chill came from inside. He jerked upright when he thought he heard something, a murmur, barely audible. He turned to go back to the cabin, but at that moment, something caught his attention. At the edge of the forest, among the farthest trunks, someone was watching her. He was a tall, motionless figure, wearing what looked like a dark hat. I couldn't see his face, but his presence was a visceral certainty. The flashlight flickered, the wind stopped, and for an instant, so did time. "Hello," said Clara, her voice weak, swallowed by the thicket. The figure did not move. Then Clara blinked, and it was gone. He ran back to the hut, closed the door and barred it with a chair. The fire still burned, but its heat did not reach his skin. He sat down on the floor, shivering. The diary was still where he had left it. He opened it again. November 13th. He comes for the returnees. He doesn't like digging. We buried him, but something stayed up. Clara could no longer deny what was happening. That figure was real. And if the diary was true, her family had hidden something. Something dark. Something that did not want to be discovered. He closed his eyes. The wind blew again, this time stronger. From outside the cabin, very close to the window, he heard a voice, just a whisper. "Clara." The fire was extinguished. Chapter 2. The Reflection in the Well. The silence became absolute. Clara stood motionless in front of the unlit fireplace, feeling the darkness begin to swallow the walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind was blowing with a deeper tone, as if it were carrying ancient voices among the branches of the forest. The voice she had heard, soft, barely a whisper bordering on human, still vibrated in her ears. Clara. It was not the echo of a memory. I had heard it. From the window, from outside. He forced himself to move. The flashlight was still on, though it flickered as if something invisible was draining it. He approached the window cautiously, pushing aside an old frayed net curtain. The night was at its blackest. The stars seemed dim, and through the trees she saw him again. Figure. It was closer now, about 20 paces from the cabin. His silhouette seemed to absorb the scarce light offered by the lantern. The hat hid his head, and no face was visible. But Clara felt his gaze, as if it were a direct pressure on her chest. Suddenly, an irrational thought crossed his mind. It's not that I don't have a face. It's that the face is somewhere else. The flashlight went out. Clara turned away from the window with a gasp, stumbling over a chair. She relit the candles, hands trembling. With the room half lit again, she searched desperately for the diary. She needed it. She felt it like an anchor between the present and the past, as if it could warn her of the horror before it became flesh. He turned pages, looking for more clues. Finally, he found a different entry, longer, written with an uneven stroke. December 28th, 1911. The blood was not enough. The well did not contain him. Elias opened the earth, searching for the voice that called him, and found it. But he did not bring it for himself alone. We bound him with names, sealed him with bones, and still he listens. Look, he copies. He remembers those who remember him, and he hates. Clara read that word over and over again. Copy. What did it mean? Was the being in the forest imitating those who saw it? Was it some kind of cursed reflection? Then another sentence on the next page froze his blood. Elias was the first to see his own face floating in the darkness of the well. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection was smiling. Clara dropped the diary. An image formed in her mind without permission. Her own face emerging from the well, distorted into a monstrous smile, with eyes as empty as the night sky. He knew he should leave, but her body did not obey, as if the roots of the forest had already touched her. And then he heard a sharp knock on the door. One, then another. They were not strong, but rather soft, insistent, like bony fingers groping the wood with familiarity. He picked up the kitchen knife he had brought, barely a rusty hunting blade. He walked to the door. He held his breath and pushed it open. No one was there, only the forest, the wind, and the echo of her fear. But when she looked down, something new had appeared in front of the door. A rag doll, worn out, with buttons for eyes, and a dress made of scraps of old newspaper. Clara lifted it with 2 fingers. One of the eyes was sewn in crookedly, as if she was smiling with only one side of her face. As I looked ahead again, the figure had returned, closer. He was no longer 20 paces away, but 10. And Clara, paralyzed by an ancestral panic, understood. He wasn't walking. He was simply closer every time she blinked, turned, or averted her attention. He slammed the door shut. He locked it. He climbed the stairs with shaky steps, up to the 2nd floor. The master bedroom was narrow, but it had one advantage, an elevated view of the well. He peered out the window with the flashlight. The trembling beam of light reached the wooden lid, but the lid was gone. The well was open. Clara felt such a strong impulse that she could not resist it. She ran down the stairs, grabbed her backpack, threw in her diary and flashlight, and ran out with the same fury with which one flees from a burning house. She walked briskly toward the well, even though everything inside her was screaming at her not to. But a part of her knew she had to look. She had to look. He bent down. He illuminated the interior. First, nothing. Just humidity and shadows. Then, a vibration. And then an eye. Her eye. Looking at her from below. Clara screamed, recoiled, and fell backwards. But she didn't stop. She crawled away from the edge until she regained control and stood up. He ran into the woods with no clear direction, flashlight bouncing among the logs. Behind her, she heard a low chuckle, as if the earth itself was mocking. The flashlight went out again, and it was in that total darkness that Clara stumbled upon something. One body. He screamed and backed away. He turned the flashlight on again in desperation, and there he was, a man, lying face down, clothes covered with dirt. As he turned him over, an icy breath cut into his chest. She was herself, her face, her clothes, her expression frozen in terror. Clara screamed until her throat tore. She ran without looking back, blind with fear. She didn't know how or for how long, but she made it back to the cabin. She closed the door, locking it with everything she could. She fell to her knees in front of the extinguished fire. She was not crazy. The newspaper was right, and the worst was yet to come. Because from upstairs he heard footsteps, slow, paused, 1, 2, 3, and a voice identical to his whispering, "Clara, are you here?" Chapter 3. The Other Face. Clara did not answer. Her throat was closed, her body paralyzed, and her thoughts caught in a whirlwind of impossible images. His dead face in the forest, the eye watching her from the bottom of the well, the twisted wrist, and now, his voice on the floor above. The crunch of footsteps advanced. 1, 2, other. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the wood groaned not only from the weight, but from the very presence of something that should not exist. Clara covered her mouth with both hands, hiding behind the fireplace. She knew the cabin was small, and there weren't many places to hide. The whisper came again. "Clara, I'm coming down." The voice was identical to his, but soulless. It was his timbre, yes, but cold, emotionless, empty. Clara crawled slowly across the floor, trying to reach the back door of the cabin. Her fingers scraped against the splintered floor as her back brushed against the wall. She knew that making noise would be the end of her. The handle to the back door was close, just a few steps away. "Do you remember the doll?" said the voice from the stairs. "It was yours. It always was." Clara stopped. The whole world seemed to stop. No one could know that. She hadn't said anything about the doll, not out loud. Yet, it was true. The doll. As a child, she had one just like it. Her mother sewed it out of old rags during a hard winter, when there were no presents and no money for toys. Clara loved her. She called her Lila. One day she disappeared in the woods after a storm, and now, there she was, again, in front of her door, 100 years later. This can't be real, he thought. None of this can be real. The back door creaked under her hand, as if the forest itself was watching her. He opened it very slowly, just a few inches. A musty smell escaped from the night. Wet earth, rotting flowers, damp wood. The stench of something old, something unearthed. Outside, the darkness stretched out like a moonless sea. He slipped through the crack, closing carefully behind himself. She did not run. She knew that to do so would give her away. She walked with light steps through the branches and mist. But then he heard it again. Not behind it. Not at the top, but in front. The same voice. "You can't run from yourself." And there, just 10 paces away, he saw the figure. It was not the one with the hat. It was her. A perfect replica of herself, standing motionless. She wore the same clothes, had the same haircut, the same hands, the same muddy boots. Clara stopped, breathless. The reflection smiled, but it was a crooked smile, as if it didn't know how to do it right. The teeth were stained, and the eyes were empty, opaque, like polished black beads, soulless. "You don't know who saw first," said the copy, without moving her lips. "You don't know if you're the original or the one who came out of the well." Clara stepped back. She tripped over a root. She fell. "What am I?" she whispered, trembling. "What's going on? A memory? A crack? A repetition of the same thing?" answered the copy, walking towards her. "You came looking for stories. But there are stories that only exist when someone brings them back." And as he spoke, the figure began to change. The skin cracked. The hair fell in clumps. Teeth sharpened. Limbs lengthened. Soon Clara was no longer looking at herself. She was looking at that. The primal form. The being from the well. An entity made of living shadows. A deformed silhouette that imitated faces like a parasite. Its body seemed to be composed of stagnant water, branches, torn skin, and human masks fused to its surface. And all those masks were looking at her. Clara screamed and ran without direction. The forest swallowed her. The being did not follow her in a hurry. It did not need to. Hours later, or perhaps minutes, time was hazy there. Clara came to a hidden clearing. There was no moon, but the sky opened just above a circle of stone. And there, in the center, was what was left of the diary. Burnt, scattered pages, small bones on the sides, an altar. He approached carefully. In the center, among the stones, he saw a word engraved with a knife on a broken board. "Look at me." The air became heavy, and Clara, as if guided by an ancient force, sat down in front of the altar. She closed her eyes. She knew she had to understand, that she had to remember. Something was incomplete, something that had followed her all her life. A memory buried like the secrets of Pennsylvania. I was 7 years old. He had gone with his mother into the woods to get firewood. He wandered off to chase a squirrel and came to a clearing. There was the well, old, closed. Curious, she removed a stone. Another one, until he heard an echo. A voice said, "Clara." Her mother found her hours later, standing silently in front of the well. Her fingernails were bleeding. She had scratched the stone until her fingers were broken, and she wasn't saying a word. That night, he dreamed of a broken mirror, with a doll, with her own face, at the bottom of the well. He came to. The altar burned without fire. From the forest he approached, more defined, more human, but not quite. A mixture of many people, and in the end, Clara understood. It was not that the being imitated her. She had been a part of him all along. She was the echo. "How long were you outside?" asked the entity. "I don't know," Clara whispered. "It wasn't you who dug the well. You were the one who came out." A tremor shook the clearing. The memory was broken. The pieces fit together. Clara was not Clara, not the original. It was the shadow that had escaped, the reflection that the girl released when she broke the stones of the well. That's why the forest called her. That's why the diary recognized her. That's why the dead face in the forest was hers, because it had happened before, and it would happen again, over and over again. That morning, county officials found the cabin abandoned. No signs of a fight, just a doll on the porch, and a well closed with new stones, as if someone had sealed it just a few hours ago. But one of the stones had a hand-carved phrase on it, "I am the one who remembers," and that wakes her up. The agents did not understand. They left the site, marked it off limits, but as they walked away, one of them, young Officer Mason, felt a twinge of discomfort. That night, as she looked in the bathroom mirror, she saw something strange. A smile, crooked, not yours. The reflection did not move when he did, and from the back of his throat, something whispered, "Mason." Laurel Hill, the historic cemetery on the banks of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, was a 19th century architectural and burial gem, a final resting place for politicians, generals, and poets. But there was one part of that place that didn't appear in tourist brochures or on the caretaker's maps, a section enclosed by rusted railings north of the Gifford Mausoleum that the cemetery staff simply called Mute Row. There, beyond the moss-covered tombstones and cracked marble, stood a small crypt with no name, built in black stone and crowned by an inverted cross that no one dared to touch. The rains did not fall equally on that part of the cemetery. The fog, even in midsummer, seemed to settle permanently, thick, viscous, as if breathing. Sam Whitaker, a 29-year-old amateur historian, became interested in Laurel Hill during the pandemic, when solitary walks through ancient sites became his way of escaping confinement. He had read about the cemetery, about the Gothic sculptures and centuries-old tombs, but what really caught his attention was a footnote in an 1893 architectural book that mentioned the crypt of the closed eyes, sealed by decree of the Archbishop and by the will of the dead. That sentence kept him awake. at night. For weeks he searched in archives, old newspapers, and ecclesiastical records, but no one spoke of that crypt. Determined, he took a small video camera and a flashlight with him one cloudy October afternoon, when the leaves were falling as if the forest was sighing, with the tacit permission of the staff's slovenliness. Sam crossed the rusty boundary separating the public area from the forgotten sector. From the first step, the air changed. It was thicker, and his boots crunched on earth that sounded hollow, as if there was an echo beneath the surface. Birdsong ceased. Everything became mute. When he reached the crypt, he found it just as he had imagined it. Black stone, no inscriptions, no name, with an iron door that seemed to have no lock, only a narrow slit in the shape of an inverted cross. With trembling fingers, Sam rested his hand on the cross. The stone was warm, alive. Whispers of Laurel Hill. As soon as he touched it, a dull click echoed from within, and the door creaked open on its own, slow, as if breathing a sigh of relief after a century of waiting. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and smelled of wet earth and old meat. The flashlight flickered once, then again. Sam descended the 5 steps into a small chamber the size of a monastic cell. On the walls, engraved by hand with a crude instrument, were Latin phrases, some worn, some crisp. Non loquantur, nec videant, nec meminarint. They shall not speak, they shall not see, they shall not remember. In the center of the room, on a granite pedestal, was a sealed glass box. Inside, a face covered by a black veil. The body was too well preserved to be more than a century old. The skin, grayish, looked like it was made of wax, but Sam knew in his marrow that it was human, real, breathing. He recoiled, horrified, but then the door slammed shut. The flashlight died. Only the faint glow coming from the glass box illuminated the place. In the dead silence, Sam heard a murmur. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside his head. Tell them not to forget me. The voice was feminine, soft, almost a whisper, but it was not hers. Sam screamed, pounded on the door until his knuckles bled. Finally, after what seemed like an hour of darkness, the door opened on its own. The cool evening air rushed in. Sam staggered out, not looking back, not closing the door. That night, dreams possessed him. He dreamed of a convent in flames, of nuns gouging out their eyes and sewing their mouths shut. He dreamed of a cross dripping blood upside down, of children crying ashes, and of the woman in the coffin, standing by his bedside, staring at him facelessly. He woke up screaming, but the worst thing was that in his mouth there was ash. For the next few days, Sam tried to convince himself that it had been a hallucination, but every time he slept, the woman came back, closer and closer. In the third dream, she spoke. They buried me alive. They tore my name from me. You will give it back. Sam began to do more research. He went to the Historical Library of Philadelphia. In an 1834 codex, he found a paragraph that spoke of a Sister Herminia, a nun accused of witchcraft, whose conviction had been secretly handed down by the archdiocese itself. Locked up in life in the dark pantheon, it said, the last penitent of the sealed eyes. The attending historian, an elderly man named Mr. Kepler, advised him not to investigate further. These things are not made for the modern mind, he told her. There are spirits that only need a name to return, and you already know it. That night, Sam dreamed he was in the crypt again. but this time with dirt up to his knees as if sinking. The woman whispered in his ear, "Name me." Sam woke up with a scream, with dirt under her fingernails. And then she understood. She didn't want to rest. She wanted to go back, and I was using him. Chapter 2. Those who remember their name autumn grew crisper in Philadelphia. The streets lining Laurel Hill seemed to shrink under the lengthening shadows of the oak trees, and the wind blew with a voice more like a moan than a breeze. Sam Whitaker was barely asleep. When he closed his eyes, the woman in the coffin would visit him. She no longer watched him from afar. Now she spoke in his ear. She asked him, gently and menacingly, to complete the ritual. "My name is lost, but you have brought it back." Sam began to write compulsively in his notebook, without remembering doing so. He found torn sheets of paper on the floor with phrases in ancient Latin and names of nuns who had been dead for centuries. The most recurrent, Herminia de la Cruz. Sometimes she would wake up in front of the crypt door with mud on her shoes and her lips cracked from mumbling. Her sanity was beginning to crack. Desperately seeking help, he contacted a young librarian and local folklore researcher named Clara Elston, who had published articles on Pennsylvania's cursed places. He found her in a Kensington coffee shop, and when he showed her the name and story, Clara blanched. "Did you open the crypt? The one with the inverted cross?" Sam nodded. Clara looked at him with genuine dread. "No one is supposed to open it. It's sealed with salt and ecclesiastical symbols. No one should, unless something from inside wants to get out." Clara accompanied him to the Temple University archive, where they traced documents from convents that disappeared after mysterious fires in 1826. A disturbing pattern emerged. Each fire coincided with reports of profane ecstasies, as the bishops called them, nuns who spoke in tongues, levitated during Mass, or prophesied the end of the world. In one of the files, they found a text dated March 14th, 1827, a letter from Bishop Carswell to Pope Leo XII. In it, he mentioned Sister Herminia, whose body resists corruption after her manifest heresy, and whose tongue still moves when she is named. That sentence made them tremble. Clara proposed something risky. Return to the crypt together and seal it again. Sam was not convinced. Part of him was already attached to Herminia. Part of him wanted to see her again, to touch that black veil, to ask her why she had chosen him. But he agreed. That night, with salt, crucifixes, and ancient chants, they crossed the gate to the forgotten section. The atmosphere was heavier than ever. Something invisible seemed to move through the trees, noiselessly. The door to the crypt was still open. Inside, the glass box was empty. "It can't be," Sam whispered. It was here. The air became icy. Clara held the crucifix tightly, and then they saw it. On the wall, carved with claws or some bone knife, a sentence: "The living forgot me, the dead still remember me." And on the floor, a figure, sitting, shrunken. The silhouette of a woman, covered with the same black veil, head cocked to one side, the skin of an ashen gray, but alive, breathing. Herminia. "Let's go now," Clara shouted, but Sam was paralyzed. The woman got up, slowly, with movements that did not seem human. She did not walk. She slid her feet, as if the earth did not touch her. She reached out a hand to Sam. Her voice came not from her mouth, but from the walls, from the floor, from inside their minds. "Now you know. You know how they condemned me, how they buried my body, and my faith. And you are the final nail. The ground shook. Clara pulled Sam and dragged him out of the crypt as the air filled with a high-pitched screech, like 1,000 insects screaming at once. When they crossed the rusted grate, all was silent. The crypt door closed again on its own. Sam fainted. He woke up in his apartment 3 days later. Clara had taken him in her car. She had called 911, but she didn't tell anyone what happened. She only left him a note on his bedside table. That woman is still walking. I'm leaving Philadelphia. I advise you to do the same. If you dream about her again, don't respond. But it was too late. That same night, Sam felt the mattress sink in beside him. A whisper, warm, slow, crept into his ear. Thank you for remembering me. Now remember me always. And when he lit the lamp, he saw written on the wall, in ash, those who remember my name can never forget it. Herminia's face was in the mirror. She was smiling. Chapter 3. The Last Procession. A week after the last meeting with Herminia, Sam no longer recognized his own reflection. The image in the mirror showed dark circles under his eyes, his skin pearly with sweat, and eyes that were not his. They were blacker, emptier. Dreams had become indistinguishable from wakefulness. In them, there was always a song, not human. Voices sharp and deep at the same time, chanting in a language that did not exist, and among them, hers, Herminia. He no longer spoke. He was in charge. Sam wrote incessantly, on the walls, on his body, on his fingernails with nadals, symbols that repeated in his dreams, a circle bitten by an inverted cross, an eye inside a tear, and the word Rememberar written in blood. The police came once. A neighbor complained about the screaming, but Sam had become adept at dissembling. He said he had stress disorder. They left him alone. No one else ever knocked on his door again. Clara Elston, who had fled to Allentown, began receiving letters with no return address, all written in Sam's recognizable handwriting. But they were not letters. They were confessions, fragments of visions. In one, Herminia was burning the bodies of priests. In another, she walked barefoot over coffins, desecrating them while eyeless nuns wept blood in her wake. He taught me that faith without pain is a lie, and I have learned to hurt, said one of the fragments. Clara, driven by a mixture of guilt and terror, returned to Philadelphia. She found him hunched over in his living room, surrounded by black candles, with the television on static and unblinking. Sam, can you hear me? He looked up. There were scabs at the corners of his lips, and his voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't drunk water for days. She's not asleep, he whispered. She's awake, Clara, walking this way, with me, behind you, always behind you. Clara turned sharply, but saw nothing. However, she felt an inexplicable coldness run down the back of her neck, as if someone was blowing on her back. She insisted on taking him with her. Get out of town, go north, away from Laurel Hill. But Sam refused. He said the last procession had already begun, and he couldn't leave her. He was her faithful, his reminder. She wants to go back to the site of the fire. She wants to walk where they burned her, where she was called a saint and a witch at the same time. The place he was referring to was Saint Agatha's convent, or what was left of it, an hour to the west, covered by woods, forgotten even in official records. According to Sam, Herminia had been executed there, along with other nuns accused of practicing the sacrament of forgetting, an occult rite that allowed certain souls to live between memory and flesh. Against all logic, Clara agreed to go with him. They arrived at nightfall. The convent was reduced to ruins, but some walls still stood. There were broken stained glass windows and a crooked cross on a peeling altar. The air smelled of mold, smoke, and rotting flowers. Sam began to sing, an inverted psalm. Clara stepped back, but it was too late. The ruins began to vibrate, as if an undercurrent was running through them. Figures emerged from the ground, not solid, not human, dressed in habits of centuries past. They walked with bowed heads, women, nuns, dozens, and behind them all, Herminia. It did not float. It did not walk. She was dragged along the earth itself, like a dead queen escorted by ghosts. Her face was no longer covered. Her eyes were empty. Her skin was pale as wax, but she was smiling. "Sam," Clara shouted, "don't follow her." But he could no longer hear her. He took Herminia's hand, and together they entered the heart of the convent. What happened next, Clara could never explain. An explosion of darkness enveloped the building. The night swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes, she was alone, lying on the road, covered in dirt and her ears bleeding. The convent, it was gone. There was only bare ground. The police didn't believe him. Neither did the psychiatrists. She was admitted to a hospital for dissociative disorder. She spent 6 months there with no visitors, until a nurse one morning left an envelope under her pillow. It was unstamped. Inside was a photo. It was an old portrait, blackened. A procession of nuns. In front, one of them, Herminia. Next to her, a man with sunken eyes, dressed in black. Clara recognized that face. That was Sam. And behind, in the shadows, something else followed them. Something faceless. Something that Clara still, to this day, swears she sees every time she turns off the light. The note on the back of the photo read, "Those who remember never die. And you already remember her, Clara. She will come for you too." It had been more than 20 years since Mark Weston last set foot in the town of Blue Ridge, a forgotten spot in the thicket of the Pennsylvania Appalachians. Since his grandmother died, there was no family left in the old log cabin at the end of the dirt road, just beyond the woods that bordered the hill. The only reason he had returned was because his mother, before she died, left him a letter. In it, a clumsily written but urgently charged sentence read, "Don't let the well stay open. Seal the lid with salt and nails. Don't listen to her." Mark thought it was a delusion, a senile superstition. His mother had been on medication, and the cancer that consumed her had also robbed her of lucidity. But something in that letter brought him back. Something she couldn't name. A pang in her stomach. An echo that wouldn't quiet. So she took a week off from work, loaded her car with tools, flashlights, and a few basic supplies, and drove into the woods like someone crossing a border she didn't want to look twice at. Blue Ridge did not appear on Google Maps. The signal cut out several miles before he got there. The only thing guiding him was an old hand-drawn map from his mother, where she had noted in red ink a dot that read simply, "The Well." The cabin was still standing, though more worn than in his childhood memories. The roof was covered with dry leaves, and the wood eaten away by the damp creaked when stepped on, but the structure held up. He entered cautiously, expecting to find animals or perhaps vagrants, but the place was intact. The curtains still hung, though torn, and on the mantel rested sepia portraits, his mother, his grandmother, and a woman with a blurred face he didn't recognize. The first day was spent cleaning. The second, exploring the surroundings. And it was on the third day that he decided to look for the well. The fog was dense that morning, as if the mountain wanted to swallow the forest. He walked about 500 meters south, following the directions on the map. Among the trees, covered with undergrowth, he found a circular stone structure, mossy and cracked, as if it had been there for centuries. It had no rope or bucket, only a rusted iron lid with carved symbols that looked like misshapen crosses and letters erased by time. A broken chain hung from the edge. He bent down. He put his ear close. Silence. But when he went to lift the lid to check the depth, he heard a faint tinkling sound, like bells, very soft, as if coming from the bottom. He pulled away abruptly. The air around him grew colder. Even though it was summer, he could see his breath in the air. He took a step back and noticed that the ground was wet. The woman at the Blue Ridge well. Not mud, not water, damp as if something had exhaled under his feet. He returned to the cabin, his heart pounding in his ribs. He did not sleep that night. After midnight, he was awakened by a sound. At first, like a whisper, then clearer. It was the bells, the same tinkling he had heard in the well, but now it was coming from the window. He got up. The cabin was dark, except for the moonlight filtering through the boards. The bells were ringing intermittently, as if something was walking with them. He walked over to the window. He saw nothing at first, only the fog, but then at the edge of the forest he distinguished a figure. It was a woman, with her back turned, dressed in a long white nightgown that fluttered in the wind without moving herself. Her hair, long and black, fell down her back, and hanging from her hands was a rope with bells tied to it. Slowly she turned her head, though her body was still fixed. It had no face, only a dark spot, as if covered by a cloth that absorbed all the light. Mark stepped back, stumbling over a chair. When he looked again, the figure was gone. For hours he sat in the kitchen, knife in hand, unable to stop thinking about what he saw. At dawn, he went out. He walked into the forest, looking for footprints, traces, any explanation. He found nothing. But he did hear voices. First it was children's laughter, then a low murmur, like an ancient chorus. She thought she heard her name, and she could have sworn that at some point, someone or something whispered in her ear, "Don't leave me alone." He ran back. Looking over his mother's letter again, he noticed something he had not read the first time, written on the back in barely legible handwriting. She lives where the earth bleeds. She was not buried, she was offered. The well feeds her, and she still waits for someone to speak to her. 2 days passed without Mark daring to return to the well, but on the third night, the bells returned. This time, louder, as if they were just outside the door. Then the knocking began. 3, pause, 3 more, pause, 3 more. The pattern chilled his blood. It was Morse code for SOS. And then warmed the voice. A woman's voice on the other side of the door, whispering as if she were mumbling a prayer. "Mark, I am cold." The door shook with a thud, as if someone had thrown his body against it. Mark shouted, but no one answered. For miles around, there was not a single inhabited house. At dawn, he took a shovel, nails, a sack of coarse salt, and went down into the well. The lid was still in place, but there was a mark on the stone, a hand marked in ash, and under it, a word written in the moss. Help. It was at that moment that he understood. It wasn't that something was locked in there. It was that something was trying to get out. and he somehow held the key. Laurel Hill, the historic cemetery on the banks of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, was a 19th century architectural and burial gem, a final resting place for politicians, generals, and poets. But there was one part of that place that didn't appear in tourist brochures or on the caretaker's maps. A section enclosed by rusted railings north of the Gifford Mausoleum that the cemetery staff simply called Mute Row. There, beyond the moss-covered tombstones and cracked marble, stood a small crypt with no name, built in black stone and crowned by an inverted cross that no one dared to touch. The rains did not fall equally on that part of the cemetery. The fog, even in midsummer, seemed to settle permanently, thick, viscous, as if breathing. Sam Whitaker, a 29-year-old amateur historian, became interested in Laurel Hill during the pandemic, when solitary walks through ancient sites became his way of escaping confinement. He had read about the cemetery, about the Gothic sculptures and centuries-old tombs, but what really caught his attention was a footnote in an 1893 architectural book that mentioned the Crypt of the Closed Eyes, sealed by decree of the Archbishop and by the will of the dead. That sentence kept him awake at night. For weeks he searched in archives, old newspapers, and ecclesiastical records, but no one spoke of that crypt. Determined, he took a small video camera and a flashlight with him one cloudy October afternoon, when the leaves were falling as if the forest was sighing. With the tacit permission of the staff's slovenliness, Sam crossed the rusty boundary separating the public area from the forgotten sector. From the first step, the air changed. It was thicker, and his boots crunched on earth that sounded hollow, as if there was an echo beneath the surface. Bird song ceased. Everything became mute. When he reached the crypt, he found it just as he had imagined it. Black stone, no inscriptions, no name, with an iron door that seemed to have no lock. The Lamentations of the Dumas House. Chapter 1. The Whisper of the French Quarter. When Elise Laurent arrived in New Orleans one overcast November afternoon, the humidity embraced her like an ancient spirit, warm and sticky, as if the city itself was welcoming her with a crooked smile. She had traveled from Chicago, escaping the noise, the pain, a recent loss she hadn't known how to process. Her mother, a Louisiana native, had died just 3 months ago, and with her death, Elise had inherited a house in the heart of the French Quarter. The old Dumas house, a forgotten mansion her mother always avoided mentioning. The property was not listed in tourist records. No one spoke of it, yet it stood proudly among the cobblestone streets and wrought iron balconies, surrounded by hanging moss and long shadows. The cab dropped her off in front of a rusty gate whose creak echoed like a human groan as she pushed it. The house was a sleeping monster. 3 stories of black wood, blind windows, and an upper dome where the reflections of the sunset danced like fatuous fires. There was something strange in the silence of the place. Despite being in the bustling French Quarter, the land where it rested seemed isolated from the world, as if it had been plucked from another dimension and placed there by mistake. Elise entered cautiously. The key she had been given fit with difficulty, as if the lock had been waiting for decades. As she opened the front door, a smell of dampness and wilted flowers enveloped her. The air was heavy, laden with more than just dust. The walls were covered with old portraits, serious faces, sad looks, all with eyes that were too vivid. "Hello," she whispered, without knowing why. The floor creaked under her footsteps, and she immediately felt a presence. It was not tangible. It was more of a gut instinct. Something or someone was watching her. She set her suitcase down next to a dusty spiral staircase and climbed up to the master bedroom, where she found a bed covered with white sheets. She carefully removed it, and as she did so, saw something move out of the corner of her eye. He turned sharply, but there was nothing. The woman who introduced herself as Madame Laveau dropped the cup she was washing. "Girl, are you sleeping in that house?" "Yes." "Why?" Madame Laveau held his hand tightly. Her eyes were full of fear. "No one has lived there since 1932. It is a marked place. It was the home of voodoo, of ancient pacts, and of the last witch of the Dumas family, Celestine Dumas, your great-great-grandmother." He paused, staring at her. She didn't die. She was imprisoned, alive, in the walls of that house. Her spirit is awake, and you have nourished it by entering. It carries the blood. Elise didn't know what to say. The words choked her. She didn't believe in witchcraft, but she couldn't deny what she had felt either. Madame Laveau took an amulet out of her apron and handed it to him. "Wear it tonight, and don't look in the mirrors. Don't answer if you hear your name after midnight." That evening, back at the Dumas house, Elise placed the amulet around her neck, but she couldn't resist the temptation to examine the mirrors. One in particular, in the second-floor hallway, looked new, as if someone had recently polished it. When he stood in front of it, he did not see his reflection. She saw another version of herself, a woman with her face, but with paler skin, flowing hair, and empty eyes. "Elise," said the reflection in a dry whisper. She stepped back. She stumbled. She fell to the ground. The mirror shattered, but the reflection did not disappear. It came out of the glass in the form of a shadow, and then he heard his mother's voice, distant, trembling, mixed with an older, deeper one. "Run, Elise. Don't look her in the eye." But it was too late. Celestine had seen her. Chapter 2. The Curse of the Black Mirror. Elise's scream tore through the air like a blade. The shadow that had emerged from the mirror stretched down the hallway, carrying with it a bone-chilling chill. The figure had the shape of a woman, but its outline was fluid, like oily smoke. Her face formed and distorted in a perpetual grimace, as if hundreds of faces were trying to emerge at the same time. Elise ran without looking back. She stumbled down the stairs, feeling each step of the entity echoing over her own, but slower, as if she was in no hurry. The front door would not open. The wood vibrated with an invisible force, as if the house was breathing. He knocked, shouted, pulled the doorknob, but nothing. Only the silence of the house broken by an ever-closer whisper. "Elise, blood of my blood, the door no longer exists for you." The whisper came from everywhere and nowhere. In an instant, the temperature dropped so low that her breath turned to steam and tears froze in her eyes. The amulet around her neck began to heat up, vibrating as if it had a life of its own. A red light burst from it, and the shadow stopped. With trembling hands, Elise tore off the amulet and hurled it at the figure. There was a deafening shriek, as if 1,000 voices were screaming from the depths of a tomb. The shadow dissolved momentarily, and the door burst open on its own, ejecting her into the street. She ran aimlessly until the cobblestone streets of the French Quarter led her back to Madame Laveau's cafe. When she burst into the room, panting, covered with dust and blood from a small wound on her forehead, Madame Laveau was already waiting for her. She held in her hand a wooden bowl filled with bird bones, lighted black candles, and a round mirror covered with a veil. "You've already woken Celestine," he said without looking up. "Now she will haunt you, not just because of what you are, but because of what's inside you." Elise did not understand. What's inside me? Madame Laveau looked at her with a grave expression. She sat down opposite her and removed the veil from the mirror. It was no ordinary mirror. The glass was black, like obsidian. Its surface rippled slightly, as if it contained a thick liquid. Celestine Dumas was a powerful mambo, a priestess of ancestral voodoo, but she was also a heretic. She crossed boundaries that even the Loas, the spirits, fear. She encased her soul in mirrors to circumvent death. Part of her, she entered your bloodline. You are not only her blood, you are her receptacle. Elise felt a shiver. It couldn't be true. Her mother had never told her about this. Never. "What can I do?" he asked in a broken voice. Madame Laveau lit a new candle, this time white. The flame flickered brightly. "You must return to the house. Only there can you face her. There is a ritual, dangerous. It requires you to enter the Black Mirror with the guidance of a Loa protector. I will summon Papa Legba, the guardian of the gates, but you must offer something in return." "What?" "A pure memory, something you love deeply, and you must be willing to lose it." Elise didn't have much, but she pulled from her jacket pocket an antique locket, a miniature photograph of her mother embracing her as a child. She placed it in the center of Laveau's altar. The woman nodded slowly. "Then get ready. Tonight, you will travel between worlds." The full moon rose over New Orleans like a cursed lantern. The bells of St. Louis Cathedral echoed in the distance as Elise, with the Black Mirror under her arm, returned to the Dumas house. No shadow dared to cross her path. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew a battle was about to begin. Upon arrival, the house seemed different, more alive or more rotten. The windows wept a black liquid, and the wood creaked without wind. Upon entering, there were no whispers, just a voice, deep and guttural. "Welcome back, Elise." She placed the Black Mirror on the floor of the main room. The candles were lit without her having touched them. She began to recite the words Madame Laveau had taught her. "Papa Legba, open the door. I pass through, you guide me. I offer what I love. You protect me from the abyss." The mirror began to glow, not with light, but with darkness. A mist emerged from its center and enveloped Elise. She felt her body being sucked in, as if her soul was falling down a bottomless pit. Then, nothing. When she opened her eyes, she was not in the house. He was inside the mirror, Cho. It was a distorted version of the world. The sky was red, the earth was ash, and Dumas House loomed even larger, twisted like a nightmarish painting. The shadows walked by themselves, and from the top of the tower, a figure watched her. Celestine. The witch descended slowly, levitating. She wore a black lace dress. Her hair floated around her like snakes, and her eyes were nothing but infinite emptiness. "At last, my blood," he said in a gentle voice. "Why do you fight against your heritage? This power belongs to you. My spirit lives in you." Elise stepped back. "You murdered innocents. You sold your soul. And what is a soul compared to eternity? Take a good look." Celestine raised a hand, and the landscape changed. Here are your ancestors, all those who betrayed me. Human figures appeared, trapped in the trees, the walls, the floors. They screamed without a voice. They cried without tears. Your mother wanted to deny me. She wanted to cut the tie. But you came to me. You opened the door. Elise pulled a ceremonial dagger from her pocket. She didn't know how to use it, but Madame Laveau had told her that she should plunge the steel into her darkest reflection. Then he understood. He was not supposed to kill Celestine. She had to kill herself. Inside the mirror. She ran towards the lake of darkness that reflected her corrupted form. And Elise with empty eyes, cruel smile, skin covered with voodoo symbols. The figure was waiting for her. When she raised her knife, so did her reflection. If you destroy me, you will never wake up, said his image, identical and monstrous. Maybe, Elise whispered, but neither are you. And he plunged the dagger into his chest. Celestine's scream was the last thing he heard. When she awoke, she was on the living room floor, surrounded by ashes. The mirror was shattered. Madame Laveau was beside her, tears in her eyes. You survived, but at a price. Elise looked at her hands. Her fingernails were black, her veins marked with symbols she didn't remember tattooing. She had survived, but something of Celestine still lived in her. And now? He asked. Now, said Madame Laveau gravely, the real hell begins. Chapter 3. Echoes that don't sleep. The weeks following the ritual slipped away like a heavy, dense fog that never completely dissipates. Elise no longer lived at Dumas' house. After the confrontation with Celestine, the structure began to crumble, not visibly, but spiritually. The walls oozed dried blood. The mirrors were fogging up from the inside. At midnight, the porch lights would turn on by themselves.